Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Coaching. My name is Kim Britz, leadership coach, trainer, international leadership facilitator, and host to the Lunchtime series where we add value to people's lives, happening every day at 12 o'clock on ebizradio.com. Today we've got back with us Barry Davis, who joins us all the way from Canada. Welcome to the show, Barry. How are you doing?
It's great to be here. I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you for making some time to chat to us today.
Pleasure, just a pleasure.
So Barry, just to recap, the last time we chatted, we specifically spoke about the importance of customer service, something that you have a great passion about and something that you shared some wonderful insights with us. And, you know, I've also been attended one of your trainings, and you specifically speak about creating habits. And, you know, the more I do what I do, the more I realize very often people have the book knowledge, people have the idea of what creating habits are supposed to look like. But in actual fact, we know it as this thing that we're supposed to do. And yet we often find ourselves, I specifically look at the leadership space and how important it is as a leader and as the leader of an environment. How do you actively get involved with creating change until it stems from how you are actioning your habit-formed behavior? It just becomes nice book knowledge. It's something, you know, you read about and you have a nice book about it or something like that. Don't you want to speak to us about, you know, from your side? I mean, I know you have quite the CV and you've been doing this for some time now, but essentially from an entry point on, why do you think, or why do you say habits or creating an effective habit is so important?
Well, you just opened up a couple more doors for us to talk about. So, I mean, I think the my goodness. So on the personal side, it's fairly obvious with things like nutrition and exercise, health-oriented things. You know, work-wise, it's, you know, organization habits, time management, how we interact with people, which, you know, is certainly through all of our lives. So there's no question that habits are just integral. I mean, whether they're conscious or not, we have developed habits over a lifetime, and many of them have been hardwired into our brain and make it almost impossible to make changes happen unless we examine what those habits are. And so you can only imagine the impact on organizations and families, personal lives, if we don't examine those habits and use some tools to make sure that when we shift them, evolve them, change them, stop them, that's done for the long term, not just, you know, that sort of natural thing that often happens where we change something for a period of time and then find ourselves right back to where we started. I think right now in our world, all across the world, we are experiencing a time that's really ripe for taking a good look at habits. A couple of reasons for that would be that, you know, our habits are vital now because we are having to change and adapt so quickly to being at home, being back at work, having our kids home, not having them home, at school. And so all around the world, people are having to adapt to changes that they maybe didn't want to have. And so that, in order for us to adapt to those changes, habits are at the center of that. The second part of it is it's a good time in a way because many of us, and I talk to people, I've been talking a lot with people in Africa the last while, and I think we're on the same page that our lives are different than they were before. And for many of us, they're in a way steadier. Even though there's all this chaos and movement and disease and so on, it's also interesting that there's a more steady environment, because for the most part, people are staying at home more. They're not traveling as much. I mean, look at what's happening to the airlines and hotels and so on. So we don't have this running away for the weekend. We don't have this going off on holidays for a couple of weeks. There's some of that, but not nearly as much. So that affords us an opportunity to have some stability as we're attempting to change a habit. And oftentimes the enemy of changing a habit is a changing schedule that makes it very difficult for us to sustain that effort. So there's a lot of factors at work, but I think this is a great time for us to examine our habits and whether they're serving us or not, whether we're just on autopilot.
Yeah, it's so many people have that I've spoken to, at least, have used COVID as a wonderful metaphor to taking a breath on, like, where am I, and reevaluating what I'm doing with my life, what is important, and how do I show up. And I think COVID, in a big way, has been symbolic of that, where we actually have to start paying attention to not only how I conduct myself and how I use my own environment and how I share of myself, but also in consideration of the next person, and how am I doing that in consideration to whoever I'm coming into contact with, and through creating proper effective habits, it can lend itself really well to that type of process. Well, one of the things that thriveglobal.com speaks about habits, and the first thing that they mention is habits are who you are. And it lends itself to that sentiment: the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. Do you find that to be true? Do you find that how you show up on a day-to-day basis with even the smallest micro behavior or habit that you form, that starts permeating into every single environment?
Yeah, I think that's true, especially with certain key habits that might be at the root of what impacts our behavior, our response to our world. So I think there are I think in another conversation we had, you're talking about, say, organization or lack of organization. Let's say a person who's basically scattered and not organized. That habit of being disorganized could permeate out into all kinds of areas of their life and affect much more than just whether or not they're working on the right priority now. It could affect relationships and so on. A relationship habit of maybe being impatient could permeate out into all kinds of effects into the personal and work lives. So I think to some degree, it's interesting. I haven't thought about this for months, but in a former program that I had built, a more extensive program on habits, we used to talk about looking at where the origins are and like work it backwards. So as far as habits, so if we're having stress in a certain period, certain area of our life, we might start to ask ourselves what habits we have relative to that area of our life, right? And that way you're looking and examining and say, okay, so how do I think about that? What kind of habits of action and thought do I have in that area of my life? And are they serving me? So pretty hard to get this perfect, but at the same time, I think this does give us a way of really drilling down into something that's more meaningful rather than band-aid solutions that we often try to quick fix with a quick workshop or something.
Yeah, and also the idea that habits are unchangeable. I think I've often come across people that just say, they just coin it as, that's who I am. I've always done this. This is what I do. I don't want to change it. I can't change it. The fact of the matter is that a habit is something that you can change. You just need to find enough motivation behind it. You need to find the motivation to do it. And to end today's session later on, we're also going to give you like practical tips on how to do that. But is that also something with the programs that you've designed and created? You find that habits are actually changeable. They're not written in stone.
I have zero question about that. I know that we can change habits. I do think that there are some deeply wired aspects to us, or habits that we have that are maybe very difficult to completely change. They may be a strong inclination for us. So let's say somebody is just highly driven. I remember coaching a senior leader one time who used to be so busy he'd read reports. He'd kick off his shoes in his office to get comfortable, and then he'd be into a report, and he'd need to go to the washroom, and he'd just be walking down the hallway reading the report, and he just was so driven and didn't want to waste a second of time. When you take a strong, deeply wired inclination like that, I kind of think of it being like a thick cable that this has been wired so heavily into our brain that it's not something that we can just say, yeah, I should probably change that and it's going to happen. That would then take either something really deeply dramatic emotionally, because we know this can happen, right? Where something traumatic happens and people just bang, they just change. But more likely for us would be something that includes some desire, some emotion to make the change, some real conviction, but also some ongoing tools that help us to shift that gradually over time. So one thing we'll talk about today is when we're looking at changing habits, by and large, here's a couple things. One is that we want to start small and then change habits over time with progression. Okay, so that, I think that's an important factor. So we'll look at a number of more tools as we go, but I think that's something to keep in mind, is that we have this inclination inside us to want to change things dramatically, to run the marathon tomorrow, even though we haven't been walking more than a block recently. And so there's this, our brain has sort of got this two sides to it in a way where there's this inclination for the quick fix. And I think it's driven to a great degree by this instant gratification tendency that we have, where we want to push the button on our cell phone or click the mouse or whatever it is and get something fixed. And so we have this strong inclination to do that, and yet at the same time our brain is basically wired to what it had yesterday. So what I mean by that is that if our brain has been used to being impatient, if there's been a strong inclination towards being impatient, it's going to want to continue to be impatient. If it's been disorganized, it's going to want to continue that way. And if we try to change those inclinations as far as habit, our brain will complain. And the bigger and faster we try to change the habit, then our brain is going to push back even more. So then the excuses, the cravings, all of those sort of pushback elements come, and they create at least discomfort, if not pain, for us. And for most of us, we just don't want to deal with that pain enough to continue the battle, right? So that's why we need some tools, rather than just sort of flailing away, making a resolution in a new year to make a change and thinking that's going to happen. And we all know how that normally works. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that, because Dr. Joe Dispenza, I don't know if you know Dr. Joe Dispenza,
yes,
he speaks about 80% or 90% of what we thought about yesterday are similar thoughts to what we thought yesterday. And the more the more we ignore or pay attention to that, the more we understand that even the thought processes and what I keep myself busy with on a day-to-day basis, and what I feed myself on a day-to-day basis, in itself, it looks for similarities to recognize the path of what it did yesterday. So your brain really wants to tie into recognizing what it's used to and comfortable with.
Yeah, it's what patterns were there yesterday, and we want to recreate those patterns, right? But the difference is we are metacognitive. We can step back, observe our thoughts and behaviors, and we can actually consciously work towards changing those behaviors over time. Absolutely agree with Joe Dispenza on that.
And also, you know, the obvious factor, which I think is when you read it, you kind of go, yeah, that's obvious. But when you practically implementing, it's not that obvious. But good habits allow you to reach your goals. You know, so by knowing what the incremental steps and those small steps are towards that goal, that also allows for you to set yourself up for some success. So essentially driving that micro behavior and paying attention to it to that degree really set yourself up to succeed at achieving your goals more than just not paying attention to it at all.
So true. And I always start our workshops by saying, you know, our the quality of our life is a reflection of our habits. So our relationships working well. I mean, this isn't a one-on-one relationship, but there's a strong inclination towards the healthier and more helpful our habits are, then we start to see that reflected more in the quality of our life, whether that's personal relationship or work success or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think that's quite a fundamental statement, right? It's like, wow, the quality of your life really does depend on your habits. And when you think of like, so what is your quality of your life? You kind of go, oh wow, I might have some really bad habits in place.
Yeah.
It lends itself to one of the points that I have here is habits set a foundation for your life. And I think that's, you know, speaks to that, you know, setting yourself up for that success, because when you know what the foundation is, looks like, behaves like, and shows up like on a daily basis, I think it would be fair to say that you actually, life is easier when you have the foundation of a successful habit.
Yeah, I think a good representation of that and an example would be one of the keystone habits that I think is so important for us to develop is a really great morning routine. And so I remember staying with a friend of mine who lives in Toronto, Canada. And at this point, when I used to stay with him once in a while when I was in his city on business, I noticed that his morning routine was about an hour and a half long. At that time, I had young children, and I couldn't imagine sort of having an hour and a half routine, but it's all relative, right? But he used to play the piano, look at his vision board, exercise, meditate, and I asked him, and I said, so, wow, that's quite a commitment every day. And he says, it's wonderful. I get to start every day controlling, you know, how that flows, and I get to kick off my day in a way that I can know if nothing else goes well, I've had success right there. Now, at the time, again, I had young children. If I could get 5 minutes to do that, that was a challenge. But, you know, I always ask my clients to think about, okay, so let's take your circumstances, be practical about it. How can you take this concept of a great morning routine and take your situation and make that happen in your way? And how can you then apply that to when you sit down at your desk and start work or whatever it might be? So I think, like you say, I mean, we add that structure, that sort of consistency that goes on, and then we can, the great thing about that is then we can start building new habits and connecting them into that solid morning routine or whatever it is, end of day routine, or whatever works best for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you know the Miracle Morning from Hal Elrod.
Some familiar, yeah.
Yeah, so you know, I've been working with a corporate research organization here in South Africa, and part of our process throughout this program for their leadership program we've actually started our sessions with the Miracle Morning, and the profound effect that it's had with just taking and the Miracle Morning separates it up into 6 10-minute sessions, from being silent to your vision board to writing down your gratitude and I'm not an early riser. It's never been something that I've enjoyed doing until I started doing this with this process and this program, and the profound effects that it's had not only on me but with my client. Just having that scheduled 1 hour, and I think the most remarkable habit that came from creating using this book as well was he mentions that sitting in silence. And I thought that was quite a, because I've heard of meditation, and you do, like, you got to settle your brain and be quiet and all that good stuff, but never consider just sitting in silence, just complete silence, not having to think about anything, not committing yourself to visualizing anything, just sitting there and just being. And I find that like such a beautiful kind of engaged process for a moment with yourself. So one of the things that and that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you is on the program that I've been on with you, and the process that you gave us 7 steps to creating an effective habit, right? Don't you want to, everyone who's going to be listening to this surely can do with 7 practical ways of creating a habit. Don't you just want to take 5-10 minutes to sort of guide us through that, what that looks like, and how anyone out there listening tomorrow morning can basically get up and create a different habit for themselves?
Sounds good. So here's a really basic process for changing habits, and you'll notice that the last step is huge because there are endless possibilities, and that's deep wiring your habit into your system. But here's the way it flows. So 7 steps. First one is really to state your aspiration of what you want to change. Do you want to become more active? Do you want to lose weight? Do you want to be more patient? Do you want to be more productive? What is it that in basic terms you want to change? So start with the aspirations. It's not specific at this point. It's just here's what I'd like to change. And then the second part of that is why. So you talk about the motivation. What we do know about habit change is that motivation is important, but it's not the thing that's going to hold you through this. So a lot of times people will say, well, I just have to keep giving myself pep talks, or if I just think positively. And that's good. That's helpful. It's part of it, but it's not going to hold you through. You need more tools to hold you through. But to start with, we want to establish up front why this change is important to us. And that could either be what would be created, what would be better if we make this change, or it could be, for some people, they work very well with the pain side of things and looking at, so if I don't do this, what might happen? And so then they, as Tony Robbins years ago would talk about adding leverage to either the pain or pleasure side. So if you add the leverage to the pain side, you might say, okay, so if I don't make this change in my diet, what's that going to look like, a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And if you start playing that out further, then the picture starts to get a little bit more graphic, I think, and have some more power to it. So I think that's important that we think through that. And it also tells us really how much conviction we have about this. If the why isn't really big, Simon Sinek would talk about how big the why is for us in business. If the why isn't really that significant, maybe we don't even really have the motivation to want this badly enough. Maybe we're doing it out of obligation or whatever. So that's an important step. what's the aspiration and why? The second step would be to take a look at what behaviors would be involved to make this change. So if I want, so now we're into idea generation, and we're looking at if I'm going to be more fit, then I could go for a walk. I could go to the gym. I could get a treadmill. I could, there might be 20 different things you could do to improve your level of fitness. So then you idea generate, maybe make yourself a mind map where you think of all of these kinds of ideas you might want to research to create more options for how you could go about making this change. Then the next step is to figure out which step 3, figure out which of those behaviors suit you best. So different people are different, right? So one question would be, will it have an impact? So you can take all of those different behaviors and sort them in by impact into low impact and high impact. What you're looking for is high impact behaviors. So you might ask yourself, well, what of all of these options to get more fit would have the most impact on my fitness? So you ask yourself that, and then you sort through those options to figure out which ones are high impact. The second part of it then would be to ask yourself, well, which ones of those do I feel like I could actually do fairly readily, that wouldn't take a huge amount for me to do? So that's starting small. It's starting with something that we can say, and I recommend that we start with options for our behaviors, the changes. Say we're considering going for a walk every day. So then we start asking ourselves, well, is that something that we would find easy to do, that we would enjoy doing? And if it would be, and it's high impact over time, then that might be a really good option for us to choose. But if it's something that might be, maybe you have to drive 20 minutes to get to a gym, and it's not easy because there's all kind of regulations now, and maybe for you that's just very difficult to do, then because the challenge part to do the behavior is so high, or take that option is so high, you may say, well, maybe that's not a good place to start. I might get there eventually. So I like people to choose a behavior or combination of behaviors that they can just say, that's easy. I know I can do that. So if someone has not been exercising at all and they decide to change the way they're exercising and they get a treadmill, I would say, hey, if you have to start by just standing on the treadmill and not even turning it on to start with, just go there for 1 minute each day and just stand on there, then that's fine. If you then decide to turn it on, that's a bonus. Okay, so you set it at a level that's so easy that your brain isn't going, no, I don't like this, that your brain is going, well, that's not a problem. So then you go ahead and you get on the treadmill, and then you start progressively expanding it out. So
yeah, and I just want
to easy things to do first, just to get you started, because your brain will then support you in making that change.
Sorry, Barry, but just to clarify, and that's really the key aim here, is as much as we mind mapping and finding very obvious things that we want to do, the aim here is to be able to do something that's really easy and something I can start doing straight away tomorrow.
Sure.
Because that way I can support that with going, well, this isn't a lot of work. I can start small, and with that I can build on this habit, right?
Yeah, and that allows your brain, which doesn't want to see much different today than yesterday. It wants that, status quo. It allows it to look at that behavior as being non-threatening. So then over time, you progressively make that change. So a year ago right now, I was starting on a new exercise routine to work towards a birthday at the end of June. And I had a goal for the number of push-ups that I wanted to do. Okay, so by the end of June, I wanted to be able to do 65 push-ups. Okay, which for me at that point I was doing about 6. So over what I did over time was I challenged myself to keep doing this gradually. I used some more of our tools like tracking each day what I did, and I had a schedule that I worked out. And by the end of those months, by the end of June, I actually was doing 2 sets of 70 push-ups each day, as opposed to my goal of 65. So the progression allowed me to see myself and my brain to be open to doing a lot more than I even thought I could do. I just had to be patient and let this happen over time. And I think that's one of the big enemies we have of changing habits, is this inclination to want to move fast and go big and do it too quickly. And then what happens is we just sabotage ourselves. So
yes.
So that's steps 1 to 3. Okay, how are we doing for time here? So
yeah, we got another 5 minutes.
Okay, so let's go through these other steps fairly quickly. Step 4 is fairly natural, as you know, Kevin, in a coaching conversation. Is the question is, what might prevent you from succeeding? What kind of barriers might be there, so we can develop some strategies, or maybe adjust the start point to make it practical, to make it really dialed down to a point that we know we're going to be able to do it. The fifth step is just stating, what is this new habit? It's walking 5 minutes every morning, because you can always change it. But what's the habit for the next week or 2? Let's say you state the habit and how you're going to make it easy. Make sure it's going to be easy. The 6th one is huge. I mean, it doesn't matter, I think, where you look in the literature, you're going to find cue, link, something that says that you need to have something that's going to stimulate you taking this action.
You're going to have that trick.
Yeah. Okay. So then the next step is to link the new habit with a habit that you already have. So if you want to do push-ups each morning, you might say, well, I will do 2 push-ups after drinking my morning coffee. Okay. Or I will read for 15 minutes after brushing my teeth, whatever it might be. Or I will floss my teeth right after brushing my teeth. So you make that linkage back to a habit that's already easy for you and already habitual and already healthy. Okay?
Yeah.
So the last one then, to put it in a nutshell, but I'll name a few things here quickly, is to deep wire your habit into your brain. So here are some thoughts on that. One is reward. So BJ Fogg, in his book Tiny Habits, highly recommend the book, and he really makes a great case for the value of celebration. So if we do those 25 push-ups and we've hit a milestone, we go, yes, I did that. Yeah, and you can feel great about it and you can celebrate. But we have to account that everybody's different and celebration looks different for everyone. So in your own way, emotionally and immediately celebrate those accomplishments as you go. I would say that tracking and journaling would be 2 other really important things that we can do that have helped us cement those habits in. And then doing resets. If you fall off your habit after a weekend, just do a soft reset and reset the habit for yourself on the Monday morning. If you need to really write out the habit again to reestablish it or change it, do a hard reset and write the whole habit out. I think if you build a plan that's explicit on paper, you have a far better chance of following through and making this a long-term habit.
And there we have it. That's just 7.
There's so much more, but I think those are some of the key things, right? So.
No, and I think that's so substantial. And for me, the clincher has always been, how do you connect the new habit to the existing one? And it's like, yes, that just makes so much sense, because then it's just that little extra thing you got to do, and then it kicks into gear, and you go, yeah, I'm actually doing it. I'm actually doing this.
Makes it easier for our brain to handle, right, and to make that connection. So.
Barry, so if people want to get hold of you, what's the easiest for them to go and check out? I want to leave it up to you to share with your information with the guys. And then obviously all this information that Barry's sharing, we are definitely going to put it in the description box below. But where do we go to know more about what you do?
Sure. I think the couple of easiest ways is to email me at Barry, BARRY, at thehumanside.ca, or you could go to the website at thehumanside.ca. I think those are probably the easiest ways to reach me.
Fantastic. Barry Davis, thank you so much for sharing such a practical and implementable tool that we can start using tomorrow. Thank you for your time, and have a wonderful day in Canada.
Thank you very much. You too.
Thanks, Barry. Chat to you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.